welcome to Simpler Bible, a daily journey to biblical understanding. Today we're going to wrap up Zechariah, and we have these last three chapters of this short book for us today, which are still speaking, I think, towards the end times and the return of Christ. Pick up with me in Zechariah 11, verse 1. Open your doors, O Lebanon, that the fire may devour your cedars. Well, O Cypress, for the cedar has fallen, for the glorious trees are ruined. Well, O oaks of Bashan, for the thick forest has been felled. The sound of the wail of the shepherds, for their glory is ruined. The sound of the roar of the lions, for the thicket of Jordan is ruined. Thus says the Lord my God, become shepherd of the flock doomed to slaughter. Those who buy them slaughter them and go unpunished. And those who sell them say, Blessed be the Lord, I have become rich. And their own shepherds have no pity on them. For I will no longer have pity on the inhabitants of this land, declares the Lord. Behold, I will cause each of them to fall into the hand of his neighbor, and each into the hand of his king, and they will crush the land, and I will deliver none from their hand. So I became the shepherd of the flock, doomed to be slaughtered by the sheep traders. And I took two staffs, one named Favor and the other named Union, and tended the sheep. In 1 month I destroyed the three shepherds, but I became impatient with them, and they also detested me. So I said, I will not be your shepherd. What is to die, let it die. What is to be destroyed, let it be destroyed. And let those who are left devour the flesh of one another. I took my staff Favor and I broke it, annulling the covenant that I had made with all the peoples. So it was annulled on that day, and the sheep traders who were watching me knew that it was the word of the Lord. And then I said to them, If it seems good to you, give me my wages, but if not, keep them. And they weighed out to me as my wages 30 pieces of silver. Then the Lord said to me, Throw it to the potter, the lordly price at which I was priced by them. So I took the 30 pieces of silver and threw them into the house of the Lord to the potter. Now, this right here, you're going to recognize this last part. If it seems good, give me my wages, but if not, keep them. And they weighed out to me 30 pieces of silver. And then the Lord said, Throw it to the potter, the lordly price at which I was priced by them. So 30 pieces of silver is what Judas gets for betraying Christ. And when he returns the silver after he sees that Christ is going to death, he returns the silver to the priest, and then they in turn buy the potter's field for it and with that money. And so there is a little bit of a reference to this in Jeremiah, but this is the direct reference that's used in Matthew. Now, Matthew, interestingly enough, in Matthew 26 and 27, when he's talking about this, references Jeremiah because it's a double quote in Matthew. And so there's a part from Jeremiah and then there's this part from Zechariah. And so some people are like, oh, look, Matthew got it wrong. He's quoting Zechariah, but he said Jeremiah. But sometimes, not every time, but sometimes when there's two parts of a quote where part of it comes from a major prophet like Jeremiah and then the other one comes from a smaller prophet, they kind of just give maybe like favoritism or whatever towards one prophet. Or, Paul, I can't say Paul, the author of Hebrews in Hebrews 4 says, and it's written somewhere that the Lord rested on the seventh day. And so I love that. So like, who knows, maybe Matthew did just mess it up, but I don't think that that's actually what's happening. I think that he's just giving preference to the major prophet that he's referencing as well. Anyway, so there's these shepherds that have been treating the people of God wickedly. Zechariah stands in as a picture, a representation of God in the same way that Ezekiel laid on his side and was bound and couldn't see Jerusalem because the iron skillet was between him and Jerusalem. And God said, so I won't set my eyes on Jerusalem. So Zechariah here is being a picture of a shepherd. And he is saying that he became the shepherd of the flock that was to be doomed. And he spoke to the shepherds, but they weren't listening to the three shepherds. And it's interesting because I'm not smart enough to know it. There isn't anything in this text that references what the three shepherds are. Off the top of my head, I can't make that conclusion as to who the three shepherds are that God becomes impatient with. I have thoughts, but I'm not settled on it enough to say it here. So when it says they weighed out my wages to me 30 pieces of silver, again, reference to Judas, and the Lord is the one who says, this is the price by which I was priced. This is the lordly price that I was priced by them. And so keep going, verse 14, I broke my second staff Union, annulling the brotherhood between Judah and Israel. So let's go back a little bit. So he broke his staff Favor, and he forsook the covenant that he had made with them. And then he broke his staff Union, and it annulled the brotherhood between Judah and Israel. And so this is kind of the breaking apart of the nations and the sinfulness of the people who have rejected God. The Lord said to me, take once more the equipment of a foolish shepherd, for behold, I am raising up in the land a shepherd who does not care for those who are being destroyed, or seek the young, or heal the maimed, or nourish the healthy, but devours the flesh of the fat ones. So those are wicked shepherds, as we saw in Ezekiel 34. They weren't finding the lost, they weren't binding up the broken, etc. So verse 17, woe to those worthless shepherds who desert my flock. May the sword strike his arm and his right eye. Let his arm be wholly withered and his right eye utterly blinded. Continuing in chapter 12, the burden of the word of the Lord concerning Israel. Thus declares the word of the Lord, who stretches out the heavens and founded the earth and formed the spirit of man within him. Behold, I am about to make Jerusalem a cup of staggering to all the surrounding peoples. The siege of Jerusalem will also be against Judah. On that day, so on the day that there's a siege against Jerusalem, I will make Jerusalem a heavy stone for all the peoples. All who lift it will hurt themselves, and all the nations of the earth will gather against it. So pay attention to this. All the nations of the earth are going to gather against the city of Jerusalem, and all who try to lift the heavy stone of Jerusalem will hurt themselves. On that day, declares the Lord, I will strike every horse with panic and its rider with madness. But for the sake of the house of Judah, I will keep my eyes open when I strike every horse of the peoples with blindness. Then the clans of Judah will say to themselves, the inhabitants of Jerusalem have strength through the Lord of hosts, their God. On that day, I will make the clans of Judah like a blazing pot in the midst of wood, like a flaming torch among the sheaves, and they will devour to the right and to the left and all the surrounding peoples, while Jerusalem shall again be inhabited in its place. So all these nations are going to be gathered together against Jerusalem, and then God is going to use Jerusalem to devour and destroy all these people. And the Lord will give salvation to the tents of Judah first, and the glory of the house of David and the glory of the inhabitants of Jerusalem will not surpass that of Judah. On that day, the Lord will protect the inhabitants of Jerusalem, so that the weakest among them on that day will be like David, and the house of David will be like God, and the angel of the Lord going before them. And on that day, I will seek to destroy all the nations that come against Jerusalem. So there it is again, and will be referenced in the following chapter in Zechariah 14:23. And I will pour out on the house of David and all the inhabitants of Jerusalem a spirit of grace and pleas for mercy when they look on me whom they have pierced. That's referenced in Revelation 1:7. This is again a reference to the return of Christ, for they will look on the one whom they have pierced, and they will mourn for him as one mourns for an only child, and weep bitterly over him as one weeps over the firstborn. On that day, the mourning in Jerusalem will be as great as the mourning as Hadad Ramon in the plain of Megiddo. That's Megiddo. It's Armageddon eventually. The land shall mourn each family by itself, the family of the house of David by itself, and their wives by themselves, the house of Nathan by itself, and the wives by themselves. The family of the house of Levi will mourn by itself, and their wives by themselves, and the Shemites by themselves, and the wives by themselves, and all the families that are left, each will weep by themselves, and the wives by themselves. Chapter 13, on that day, there will be a fountain opened for the house of David to the inhabitants of Jerusalem to cleanse them from all their sin and all their unrighteousness. And on that day, declares the Lord of hosts, I will cut off the names of the idols from the land, and they will be remembered no more. And I will remove from the land the prophets and the spirit of uncleanliness. And if anyone again prophesies, his father and mother who bore him will say to him, you will not live, for you speak lies in the name of the Lord. And his father and mother who bore him will pierce him through when he prophesies. On that day, every prophet will be ashamed of his vision when he prophesies. He will not put on a hairy cloak in order to deceive, but he will say, I'm not a prophet. I'm a worker of the soil. A man sold me in my youth. And if one asks him, what are the wounds on your back? He will say, these are the wounds I received in the house of my friend. Awake, O sword, against my shepherd, against the man who stands next to me, declares the Lord. Strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered. So this is quoted in Mark 14, it's quoted in Matthew 26, that when Jesus was arrested, the sheep were scattered. I will turn my hand against the little ones. In the whole land, declares the Lord, two-thirds will be cut off and perish, and one-third will be left alive. And I will put this third into the fire and refine them as one refines silver and test them as gold is tested. And they will call upon my name, and I will answer them, and I will say, these are my people, and they will say, this is my God. Final chapter of Zechariah, chapter 14. Behold, a day is coming for the Lord, when spoil will be taken from you and will be divided in your midst. For I will gather all the nations against Jerusalem to battle, and the city will be taken and the houses plundered and the women raped. Half of the city will go out into exile, but the rest of the people will not be cut off from the city. And then the Lord will go out and fight against those nations when he fights on the day of battle. On that day, his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives that lies before Jerusalem on the east, and the Mount of Olives will be split in two from east to west by a very wide valley, so that one half of the mount shall move northward and the other half southward. And you will flee to the valley to my mountains, for the valley of the mountains will reach Azel. and you shall flee as you fled from the earthquake in the days of Uzziah, king of Judah. Then the Lord my God will come with all his holy ones with him. And on that day, so the Lord will come with all my holy ones with him. That's kind of similar to what we're seeing in Revelation 19, 11 through 16, that when Christ shows up, he comes with all the armies of the host of heavens at his heels. On that day, there will be no light, cold, or frost, and there will be a unique day which is known to the Lord, neither day nor night, but at evening time there will be light. On that day, living waters will flow out from Jerusalem, half to the east sea, half to the western sea, and it will continue in summer and in winter. So these references are found for us in Revelation 22, verse 5, and Revelation 21, verse 23, that God is the glory that illumines heaven, but also the stream of the river of life, the living waters that flow out and produce life. And the Lord will be king over all the earth on that day, and the Lord will be one, and his name will be one. And the whole land will be turned into a plain from Geba to Rimmon, south of Jerusalem. But Jerusalem will remain aloft on its site, from the gates of Benjamin to the place of the former gate, to the corner gate, and from the tower of Hananel to the king's wine presses. And it will be inhabited, for there shall never again be a decree of utter destruction. Jerusalem will, from that point forward, dwell in security. And this shall be the plague with which the Lord will strike all the peoples that wage war against Jerusalem, that we saw 2 chapters ago, gathered against Jerusalem. Their flesh will rot while they're still standing on their feet. Their eyes will rot in their sockets, and their tongues will rot in their mouths. And on that day, a great panic from the Lord will fall on those who oppose Jerusalem, so that each will seize the hand of another, and the hand of one will be raised against the hand of another. Even Judah will fight against Jerusalem, and the wealth of all the surrounding nations will be collected, gold, silver, and garments in great abundance. And a plague like this plague will fall on the horses and mules and camels and donkeys and whatever beasts may be in those camps. Then everyone who survives of all the nations that have come against Jerusalem will go up year after year to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, and to keep his feast of booths. So all the nations that gathered against Jerusalem will come back year after year to worship the Lord. And if any of the families of the earth do not go up to Jerusalem to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, there will be no rain on those nations. And if the family of Egypt does not go up and present themselves, then on them there shall be no rain, and there will be plague with which the Lord afflicts the nations that do not go up to keep the Feast of Booths. And this shall be the punishment to Egypt and the punishment to the nations that do not keep the Feast of Booths. On that day there will be inscribed on the bells of the horses, Holy to God. And the pots in the house of the Lord shall be as bowls before the altar. And every pot in Jerusalem and Judah will be holy to the Lord of hosts, so that all who sacrifice may come and take them and boil the meat of the sacrifice in them. And there will no longer be a trader, not traitor, trader, in the house of the Lord, all of the host on that day. And so Zechariah, lots of mysterious stuff, telling you that I don't understand the fullness of it. There are definitely some ties to Revelation. There are definitely some ties, in my opinion, there are to the end of Isaiah. Some of the things that Isaiah says, definitely, I think, some connections to what we see about the last days in Ezekiel and Daniel. And so Zechariah, during the days of Haggai, as the temple is being built, keep this in mind. He's prophesying as the temple is being built. The people are going, oh, good, the temple's being built. God's restoring us. God's rebuilding us. And Zechariah is prophesying of future days far out there that they, as of yet, have not been able to fathom or comprehend. And that, I think, for the most part, even we believers are still struggling to fathom and comprehend these last days of the Lord, which is why there are so many people who have different end times views, and there's so much debate about it. But that's Zechariah. Like I said, when we started him a couple of days ago, it is becoming one of my favorite books, and I long to understand it on a deeper level. And when I do, I'll share that with you at some point. But tomorrow we're going to start in Esther. We're going to spend a couple of days in the book of Esther, so join us then. It's a short book. If you wanted to read ahead, you can be prepared for the next few days. Have a good day, and we'll talk to you next time. Thank you so much for journeying with us today at Simpler Bible through another section of Scripture where we come to know and understand God a little bit better. Look, if you're brand new to Simpler Bible, we have all sorts of resources available for you. Go to our website, simplerbible.com, and there you can find these videos, you can find our podcast, you can find links to our social media, and you can even find a blog post with additional scriptures if you want to go into a little bit more study than we had time to cover in this podcast and video today. We hope that this tool will be exactly that for you, a tool. Not something that replaces your daily walk with God, but something that enhances your daily walk with God and helps you to know and enjoy Him more. Thank you so much for being part of this, and we'll see you again tomorrow.